This is the first class of this course, Introduction to Psychology. So in this chapter, we are going to learn what is psychology. And so this is the textbook that you should be using. And some of you might be using Psych 5, the previous edition. But I have checked and there isn't that much of difference, so it should not be a problem. So in this chapter, we are going to learn historical background of psychology, what psychology is, and so on. And each chapter starts with some introductory passage that gives you some ideas to what's coming within this chapter. And I am not going to go through all of the contents of the textbook because you can study that online or through your own copy of textbook, but I'm here to supplement whatever might be missing and give you some idea as to what to expect within this chapter. Right, so starting with the definition, it is defined as the scientific study of behavior and mental processes. So here the keyword is scientific, meaning that it is objectively measurable and can be validated. So it has to be valid and reliable. And it is very broad in its scope, as you shall see throughout this book. And topics include things like face recognition, like how people recognize faces, how people recognize facial emotions, social judgment, memory, and so on. And the goal of psychology is to describe phenomena and also explain why it is and predict what's going to happen under certain situations and control behavior and mental processes. So here are the learning outcomes that you see at the beginning of this chapter. So if you have a paper version of your textbook, it should be on page 2. So these are the items that you're going to learn. So 1.1, psychology as a science. So in any study, but including psychology, there is theory, and theory can allow one to propose reasons for relationships among events and derive explanations and make predictions. For instance, there is a theory on how people pay attention to certain things, ignoring other items. For instance, how you can pick out a particular sound among lots of other noise, for instance, announcement in loud and noisy train station. And psychological theories combine statements about behavior, mental processes, and also biological processes, like what is the underpinnings of biological activities in the brain. And here are some of the things that psychologists do: research, and some people do practice, such as clinical psychologists, counselors, and then teaching. The field of psychology is quite diverse, as you can see here. And the clinical counseling, that's the most clinical part, school education as well. Whereas experimental psychology is sort of more science-oriented studies, like memory or attention, perception, and so on. And then industrial, organizational, and human factors. And the consumer health, forensic sports is just some of it. And in fact, at American Psychological Associations, there are more than 50 divisions of subfields of psychology. Moving on to historical foundations. So in this section, you're going to see some of the salient aspects of aspects that happened in history of psychology. So the ancient contributors, even though it wasn't exactly called psychology at the time, include Aristotle, who suggested that the human behavior is governed by external events and it can be studied scientifically. And Democritus suggested that there is this issue of the mind and the brain, or rather biology, something physical and something mental, And he also was the first to raise this issue of, is there a free will or choice? Hence, his name is now found in the word democracy. And it's Socrates who proposed that rational thinking, such as looking at rationally how our thought or feeling processes work. So he's the one that suggested introspection. That means looking inward. And then there's after that, much later in 19th century, Fechner and Wundt, they started psychology as a laboratory science. And Wundt especially is famous for studying physical experience, such as, or perceptual experience, such as light or sound and so on. And he studied structuralism. So structuralism was founded by Wundt, and it breaks conscious experiences into objective sensations, subjective feelings, and mental images. And in order to study that, he asked the subjects, participants, to rationally explain what they're experiencing. And this is known as analytical introspection. So his belief was that the mind functions by combining objective and subjective elements of experience. So he founded this laboratory in Germany, and his idea was later taken and spread in America by his student called Titchener, and that's where this name structuralism was coined. The functionalism was founded by William James, who's a brother to Henry James, the author, and it focused on behavior in addition to the mind or consciousness, and used direct observation to supplement introspection. So still introspection did exist in this instance, and they were influenced by Darwin's theory of evolution. So that means that adaptive behavior patterns are learned and maintained, so passed on to the next generations. But introspection was criticized by some people, saying that it was not scientific enough, because introspection means that you are describing your own experience, but sometimes people may not be so accurate about how people are experiencing sound or brightness or whatever the thing that they are exposed to. And there's no consistency within the individual or across individuals. So it was not scientific in the sense that it was way too subjective. And because in the 1950s they really wanted psychology to become scientific field, some people, group of people known as behaviorists, have suggested that we should only focus on observable behavior, ignoring whatever is not visible, such as mental processes. So Watson is the one who studied conditioning. So I'm going to show you the video on the next slide. And Skinner also was one of the most famous behaviorists who believes that learned behavior is the behavior that is reinforced. So if you get some positive outcome by having some sort of behavior, then that behavior is more likely to happen. So if a rat presses a button and it gets food, then the rat is more likely to press the button. Whereas if rat presses the button and nothing happens, it is not so likely to press so frequently. So this positive kind of outcome is known as reinforcement. Stimulus that follows a response and increases the frequency of the response. So here is a video of a Little Albert study that was conducted by Watson. So the idea is that even something psychological like fear is actually the result of conditioning. So let me see here. I'll play this video.
Here is little Albert prior to conditioning. As you can see, he is not afraid of the rat. 5 days later, we see little Albert after his conditioning. His fear of the rat is readily apparent. His fear generalized to other furry objects, such as this rabbit. Generalization also occurred to a fur coat and to a Santa Claus mask worn by Watson.
So what they did here is that after establishing the fact that little baby Albert was not afraid of rat, in fact he liked it, they then combined this experience of seeing the rat and really scary loud noise. So every time rat appeared, baby Albert heard really scary loud noise. So he made the association. But here, what was happening inside him, what he might be experiencing, what he might be thinking, is not the focus of the attention, but the behavior. That is how he showed fearful behavior by crying or trying to avoid. So according to Watson, fear is very much learned experience, learned behavior. And behaviorists have shown that we can teach animals and also people complex behaviors by first reinforcing approximations to the goal or target behavior. So for instance, in this picture, we might first drop a food pellet into birdcage when she drops a star anywhere on the tray, and then demand closer tries before reinforcing her. With people, of course, one can reinforce desired behavior by saying things like good, or that's right, or you're getting there, instead of giving them food. But the idea is that, according to behaviorists, any sort of complex patterns of behavior, everything was acquired through such conditioning. And then, after that, Gestalt psychology was founded by Wertheimer, Kafka, and also Keller. So instead of just focusing on perception and its influence on thinking and problem solving, focuses on the conditioning, they focused on the perception and its influence on thinking and problem solving. So it is not like structuralism, the combination of little events that make up the whole, but perceptions are in fact more than the sum of their parts. And also, they suggested that learning is an active and purposeful processes rather than something passive like the conditioning. And this is accomplished by insight, not just mechanical repetition. So here are some samples of Gestalt stimuli. So Gestalt psychologists have shown that we tend to interpret objects and people according to their context. So you interpret somebody's running towards you differently when you are in a dark alley. So that might be considered as threatening, or watching a football game. That is not scary. So if you look at the example A here, if you look at the circle dot in the center, depending on whether it is placed among the bigger circles or smaller circles, they might appear differently. And if you look at B, you would see the top one as A, B, C, D, and lower one as 12, 13, 14, 15. But when you look closely, B above and 13 below are exactly the same. But we make the interpretation based on the context. And then C, you might see them as different colors. So when you look at the gray square in the center, depending whether it is surrounded by black or white, one of them probably would appear brighter. Also, in terms of insight, this shows the Taylor's study. So at first, on the left side, the chimpanzee cannot reach the bananas hanging from the ceiling. Now, behaviorists would expect that the monkey to learn only after making these associations of stacking up the boxes and then reaching at something. But here, without being taught, without being given examples, the monkey, after some time has passed, has an apparent flash of insight, like moment of aha, and piles of boxes on top of one another to reach the fruit. And once it has acquired this skill, if it couldn't find any boxes, he even brought in the experimenter and made him stand underneath the bananas and climb up on his shoulders to get at them. So it can get insight, which is not explained in behaviorists' ideas. Then around the same time, psychoanalysis was developed by Sigmund Freud, and it studied the personality that proposes that people's lives are influenced by unconscious ideas. And he also developed certain methods of psychotherapy that helps patients gain insight and seeks socially acceptable ways to express wishes and gratify needs, because people have inherently have unacceptable urges like aggression or sexual desire for something that they cannot get. So when they cannot satisfy their needs or wishes, they might have anxiety, and through psychoanalysis they can find a way of dealing with some of those anxieties. So that was the classical part of the psychology. So more contemporary perspectives in psychology includes biological perspective that seeks the relationship between brain and also hormones, heredity, and evolution. So how certain behavior is underpinned by brain activities or genetic aspects, and how behavior and mental processes interact with the brain and biological processes. As a cognitive perspective, as I said earlier, behaviorists removed anything that was not visible. So cognition or mental processes were exactly the kind of thing they wanted to avoid. But eventually, people came to realize that we cannot completely ignore mental processes. So it came back into view. So cognitive perspectives looks at mental processes to understand human nature, and studies those things that are referred to as the mind. The humanistic existential perspective, the humanism, stresses on human capacity for self-fulfillment, role of consciousness, self-awareness, and decision-making, and existentialism stresses on free choice, like the Democritus has suggested, and holds people responsible for the choices that they made. And this perspective is based on the works of Rogers and Abraham Maslow. And the psychodynamic perspective includes neo-analysts, that are contemporary psychologists who follow the theories derived from Freud, so slightly different, not exactly the same as Freudian theory, but derived, including Karen Horney and Erik Erikson. So it focuses more on the conscious choice and self-direction than unconscious processes. Perspectives on learning. Behaviorists view still suggests that learning occurs through learning histories or situations and reward and not through conscious choice. But social cognitive theory suggests that people do modify and create their environment, and cognition plays a key role. And people engage in intentional learning through observation rather than passively just getting some sort of stimulus and reinforcement or punishment. Sociocultural perspective focuses on the influence of ethnicity, gender, culture, and socioeconomic status on behavior and mental processes. Ethnicity means the members of an ethnic group share cultural heritage, race, language, or history. And gender is culturally defined concept of masculinity and femininity that involves cultural expectations and social roles, what women should be like, what men should be like. Right, so that the first 3 sections of chapter 1. So have a look at your textbook, learn some keywords, key concepts, and study some of the exercise, the quiz